Hello and welcome to our book club presentation. Mikeisha and I reviewed or read Grace and Grit, subtitled My Fight for Equal Pay and Fairness at Goodyear and Beyond. It's written by Lily Ledbetter with Lanier Scott Esom. Lily Ledbetter was one of the first females to be hired on the Goodyear management team in 1979. Prior to that year, there had been no females at all on Goodyear's management or executive team. She had grown up within a short distance of the Goodyear plant in Alabama and had lived in its shadow throughout her life. Lily remained strong and resilient the entire 2 decades of her career, which were fraught with harassment and discrimination, until the day she walked in to start her shift and found a note that exposed the salaries of 4 of her male colleagues in 1998. At that moment, she learned that she was making far less than the men who held similar management positions. These men were making between $1,000 and $2,000 more per month in base pay, not including the significant overtime that they had. After discovering this horrible truth, Lily began to fight for equal pay. She approached the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 1999 and hired a legal team to sue Goodyear for wage discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Her case was first heard by the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama. After a rigorous trial, the jury agreed with Ledbetter's allegations and awarded her $3.3 million in back pay and damages. The amount was later dropped to a measly $300,000, as prior courts had set a limit on such awards. Goodyear appealed the decision, and it was reversed by a higher court. The U.S. Court of Appeals in the 11th Circuit determined that her wage discrimination claim was submitted too late and went beyond the 180-day statute of limitation. Then in 2007, her case was finally heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. In a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court upheld the U.S. Court of Appeals ruling and again cited the 180-day statute of limitation.
Justice Ruth Ginsburg, who was the only female Supreme Court justice at that time, dissented with the ruling. She said the court does not comprehend or is indifferent to the insidious way in which women can be victims of pay discrimination. She asked and encouraged Congress to take action and change the law. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was the first piece of legislation in his administration. The Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act helps to protect workers' rights to act against wage discrimination. It also allows the 180-day statute of limitations to reset with each discriminatory paycheck. Lily Ledbetter struggled throughout her career between staying at home with her children and supporting her family by working, especially because she grew up during a time when women were expected to stay home. After telling her mother that she had applied and interviewed at the Goodyear plant, her mother asked her, "Shouldn't you be doing what a woman's supposed to do?"
According to our textbook, many explanations have been given describing the difference in women's earning power. Some would be considered laughable today, such as traditionally women were not the family's major wage earners, nor did they have comparable salaries to men's if they did work. Women's wages were considered secondary or as a supplement to their spouse's wages. Women were considered temporary employees who would leave their jobs to marry and have children. They were not seen as serious about their careers. Women's work outside the home was considered to be an extracurricular activity or just to fill free time. What was considered women's work, cleaning, childbearing, did not pay a wage. Traditionally, women went on welfare because they were expected to remain at home to care for their young children when their husbands were unable or unwilling to support the family. Women who did go to work to support themselves and their children were generally forced into lower paying jobs. Women still make up the most adult recipients in the TANF and SSI programs, with their benefits generally being less than men's. Our research shows that women generally make up 85% of TANF recipients. These female-headed households are the most vulnerable to poverty. In 2017, 25% of women-headed households with no spouse present were living in poverty.
As women started to progress and want more for themselves, the idea of doing more than just women's work, cooking, cleaning, and raising men's children, sparked an increase in feminism. Core feminists believed that women should have the same social, economic, and political rights as men. Today, there are many branches to feminism that also include men and their uplifting of women's equality and even superiority at times. But at its roots, feminism was intended to be a positive movement for women and their rights. In her book, Lily discusses her trials of competing with the men in her company for not only equal pay, but equal job opportunities such as raises and recognition. Our textbook states that this idea of equality stems from the feminist movement, where a core feminist belief is that women should have the same social, economic, and political rights as men. According to Donetto and Johnson, in 1955, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculated that women earned 64 cents for every dollar earned by men. In 1961, that actually decreased to 59 cents. In the 80s, women's earnings exceeded 60%, or 60 cents to the dollar. In 2013, the earnings of women 16 and older were 82% of men's, whereas women ages 25 to 34 earn 89% of men's earnings, and women 45 to 54 earned less than 77%. Keep in mind that this pay gap does not take into account the cost of health insurance, retirement, or other benefits that workers might receive. The economist Evelyn Murphy, who's the president of the Wage Project, estimates that over a lifetime, which equates to about 47 years of full-time work, this gap amounts to a loss in wages for a woman of $700,000 for a high school graduate, $1.2 million for a college graduate, and $2 million for a professional school graduate.
PayEquity.org states that the research has shown that women will not receive equal pay until 2059, which is way longer than what it needs to be. Upon signing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act into law on January 27, 2009, President Barack Obama left us with these thoughts. Equal pay is by no means just a woman's issue. It is a family issue. And in this economy, when so many folks are already working harder for less and struggling to get by, the last thing they can afford is losing part of each month's paycheck to simple and plain discrimination. Ultimately, equal pay isn't just an economic issue for millions of Americans and their families. It's a question of who we are and whether we're truly living up to our fundamental ideals. Whether we'll do our part as generations before us to ensure those words put on paper some 200 years ago really mean something, to breathe new life into them with a more enlightened understanding that is appropriate for our time. Now we have a short video of Lilly Ledbetter commenting on the signing of her Fair Pay Act into law.
After nearly 2 decades of hard, proud work, I found out that I was making significantly less than the men who were doing the same work. We decided to fight because making our economy work means making sure It works for everybody. Women still earn just 77 cents for every dollar men make. Those pennies add up to real money. Maybe 23 cents doesn't sound like a lot. When we lose 23 cents every hour, every day, every paycheck, it's about my daughter. It's about my granddaughter. It's about women and men. Equal pay for equal work. It's about equality.
All right, so we wanted to just share our own personal thoughts and reflections on what we feel. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. We wanted to share personal thoughts and reflections about some of the points that were asked in our presentation outline. And what I wanted to speak to was how would I take what I've learned about wage discrimination and the wage gap, discrepancies in wage earnings, and apply that to my work as a social worker. And while I had been aware of the wage gap, mostly because of like the Me Too movement of recently, I didn't know that this woman existed who had fought for this so many years ago, yet nothing's really changed since then. So what can I do as a social worker to help propel this closing of the gap and helping people to realize their worth in the workplace is to fight against the secrecy of wages in the working world, in the workplace. So many companies today will actually fire you if you know a coworker's or a colleague's salary. In a large corporate company that I worked for previously, it was if you were told or knew someone else's salary, you could be held, you could be terminated immediately for that. So I think that secrecy there can be a means to perpetuate discrimination in wages, because companies don't have to share with each other or with their workers what they're paying one another. And in order for us to be able to stop wage discrimination, that needs to be much more transparent. I'd also encourage the clients that I have who feel like that might be happening to them in the workplace to act much faster, possibly than Ms. Ledbetter did. While she kind of thought that was going on, she did wait about 2 decades to act on that, and we see what the result was in that. So by fighting against that type of discrimination, utilizing their resources, getting connected with legal aid that will help them in the fight. I mean, Lily would not have been able to approach the Supreme Court without the EEOC. There's many different ways that we can help close that wage gap and have women earning what they are worth and equal pay to men much faster than 2059.
My personal reflections are just going to be about our group thoughts on the book, and give the flavor, if you will, as was in the discussion questions. I will say that we were just generally disappointed in the ending of the book because she was not able to win her case per se. We thought there would have been more of a success story in the end, and we could have one up for women and equal pay and woohoo, but we didn't get that. Yes, in the beginning she was awarded $3.3 million, which would have been that great woohoo, but in the end she was only actually given $300,000, which, if you don't account for lawyers' fees and things, probably comes down to a whole lot less than $300,000. And that even with the $300,000 doesn't even begin to outweigh all of the discrimination that she experienced while she was at Goodyear. Her car was egged. One of the other coworkers dropped a machine on her and she broke her leg. Also, she got repeated bad evaluations and bad performance evals, which led to several demotions and even layoffs and bringing her back and then laid off again. She went through a lot in her 20 plus years at Goodyear, only for her to be doing the best that she could, which she thought was the best, working harder, she was working 12-hour days for her 8-hour shifts. And her family, she missed out on so much, the births of her grandchildren's birthday parties, dances, dinners with her husband, her children suffered. And she really thought, she was just doing her best to support her family. And that, by going through the lawsuit, that it was going to finally be worth it. And it just didn't seem so in the end. So I will say that, yes, we did get the Fair Pay Act and into law. And that was a great, thumbs up for women's rights. However, for her own personal journey, it just didn't outweigh the discrimination and the torture that she had there. So that was just my thoughts. Like I said, she got like less than 10% of what she was owed. So kind of sad.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. We had fun reading the book. It was great. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.